The arrival of the First Fleet marked the start of an English colony in Australia, which only happened because of Cook's journey in the late 18th century. But that's the British story. Many other nations were sailing the high seas in a race to find a great southern land. And there's one first contact theory that blows all others out of the water. I'm heading to a secret location not all that far from where Captain Cook first landed. My guide is an environmentalist named Jake Cassar, who subscribes to a very radical take on history. What's more, he's going to show me the evidence. Well, this is the last place you'd expect to see Egyptian hieroglyphs, isn't it? There are so many. There's a load over here, and up here as well. Do we know what they say?
There's a story I heard from an old lady when I was a young fella growing up not far from here, and this is just local folklore, Tony. 2 Egyptian princes came out here, of course, all the way from Egypt and ended up shipwrecked. And they've made their way up the hill where one of the brothers got bitten by a snake, and this may be a representation of the snake here with the horned viper, and the 2 little birds may represent the Egyptian princes. So one of the brothers was bitten by a snake and passed away, and the other Egyptian brother lived his life out here with the local tribe. So this is independent Aboriginal folklore that tells the same story about Egyptians? Yeah, well, there's a group out at Penrith, a tribe out in the Sydney area that apparently use a lot of Egyptian words in their language. Also in Western Australia, they say that they've got the same word for sun, Ra. There's a criticism, isn't there, that actually the Egyptians didn't have the technology to sail boats all this way 4,000 years ago. I've heard that, but if the Aboriginal people came over on canoes and the Maori went to the land of the long white cloud in canoes, I can't see why the Egyptians couldn't do it. I mean, they had flushable toilets a couple of thousand years before Christ. You're very robust about this, aren't you? You believe it? Well, if it is genuine, then it could really change history the way we know it. Just a bit, mate. I love Jake's passion, and I love the fact that he's determined to believe that it's all true. But look at me, I'm just an old English skeptic. To me, the idea that an Egyptian civilization discovered Australia 4,000 years ago is just very, very daft. But maybe what all this does demonstrate is the fact that we all yearn to have something ancient and dramatic in our lives and in our landscape. But the irony, as far as the Australians are concerned, is that they do. Look at all these. These are the marks left by Aborigines over thousands of years. That is the real dramatic, ancient, magical story of Australia. The Australian Aboriginals are custodians of the oldest continuous culture in the world. And it's pretty likely that they're the world's first astronomers too. There are hundreds of stories about the night sky among Aboriginal groups in all parts of Australia. But the stars serve a more practical use too. Every year, directly above this rock engraving, the Emu in the Sky constellation comes into view just when it's time to gather emu eggs. Up in Arnhem Land, the Yolngu people knew when Scorpius appeared, it meant the Macassan fishermen of Indonesia would soon arrive. From the Aboriginal perspective, the idea of a race to the end of the world must seem pretty absurd. They won that race more than 40,000 years before it began. Whether they island hopped or walked across a land bridge from New Guinea is still a matter of debate. The point is, they were here long before anyone else. But who came next? If not the Egyptians, then who was the first non-Aboriginal to discover the Australian coastline? It may well have started with the Chinese.
We know that in the Ming dynasty, that's the early 1400s, the emperor had an admiral who was a eunuch, and his name was Zheng He. And Zheng was in charge of a mighty ocean-going fleet, and it's reckoned that he may well have landed in North Australia in the year 1421. It's certainly possible, because he did have a trading post not that far away on the Indonesian islands. That's almost a century before Christopher Columbus discovered the Americas. And the ships of Zheng He's fleet completely dwarfed those that the Spanish sailed. But if the Chinese didn't make it to Australia, the Macassans certainly did. For hundreds of years, these hardy fishermen from what's now Indonesia made an annual pilgrimage to the north coast of Australia in search of sea cucumbers. They were regarded as an aphrodisiac back then. The cucumbers, that is, not the sailors. Australia existed in the European imagination long before a European set foot there. They called it Terra Australis Incognita, the great unknown.